This event is sponsored by the Westchester Women's Advisory Board. I'm Shannon Powell, the board chair. The Women's Advisory Board, which is comprised of women representing every county legislative district, makes recommendations to county government about issues concerning women. And that's why we feel that it's so important that we engage with you, the women of Westchester, during tonight's town hall. This is the first of 4 events that we are hosting. Other upcoming events include a roundtable on immigration issues on January 12th, a town hall on inequalities in healthcare and maternal mortality rates on February 9th, and a town hall on women's economic equality on March 9th. First of all, I have to give many, many thanks to all of the fabulous board members who worked so incredibly hard to put this event together, especially Marcy Kaufman and Lauren Smith, to Margaret Coleman, our vice chair, who says hi, by the way, Robbie Schlaff, who heads up the Office for Women, Stephanie Basilin, and to the county for being so supportive of this effort. So as we await for George, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our lovely moderator for tonight's event, Nicole Benjamin. Nicole is both an attorney and a licensed social worker who works for the county's Department of Social Services. Nicole's career has been devoted to helping disenfranchised populations in crisis, and she is also a former member of the Westchester Women's Advisory Board. So it's so nice to see Nicole back here with us tonight. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Shannon. And I am very happy to be joining the Women's Advisory Board again this evening. I want to welcome all of our participants this evening to the Westchester Women's County Advisory Board Town Hall, Staying Sane in Pandemic Times. I am Nicole Benjamin and will serve as this evening's moderator. It is my pleasure to be here this evening. I do want to take a moment to mention that some of us are experiencing a slight lag when we speak or an echo. So please be patient with us and bear with us. These are indeed pandemic times. The pandemic has been taxing for all of us, and women on the whole are bearing the brunt of the stress that comes with navigating the pandemic. We hope tonight's town hall will be both informative and helpful to women who find some of these resources they need to cope. And at that, our county executive has joined us. Please welcome County Executive George Latimer.
George is joining us by phone, so we're going to try and unmute him here. So just be patient while we try and get George on. George. All right. Give us a few. You have to love these tech issues. Hold on. All right, Nicole, while we try and work on George, why don't you keep going, Nicole?
Our guests this evening are first, Ms. Kelly Chiarella, Director of the Office for Aging in Yonkers. Ms. Chiarella has significant experience in community outreach, serves on the Yonkers Health Advisory Board and the Yonkers Community Planning Board. Next, we are joined by Dr. Alan Dimestag, who is the Clinical Director of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Counseling Center. He is a child, adolescent, and adult psychotherapist. And finally, we welcome Soledad Soriano Kaplan, mental health counselor, certified stress management specialist, yoga instructor, and currently in private practice in both Ardsley and Nyack. These 3 professionals in mental health will answer a series of questions grouped by topics, and we do welcome additional questions in the chat. You can submit your questions by typing them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Shannon, is the county executive up as yet?
To unmute him, so just go ahead as we work on this, and we will have him pop in as soon as he's available. Sorry about that.
Okay, so we'll begin our questioning. Tonight's program will begin with a discussion surrounding isolation. So many of us are struggling with isolation, and I will pose questions for all of our presenters. Alan, I have heard parents say they are not emotionally equipped to deal with their own fear of the pandemic, much less possess the language to quell the fears of their children. What do you say to these parents, Alan?
You know, the first thing I say, and it's the point that I want to make about parents and children, is to validate the fears, the concerns that those parents have. We've never been in this situation before. Why should we feel like we know what to do? Why should we feel like we have the answer? Uh, it it defies credibility for anyone to suggest that somehow, out of nowhere, they have a sense of confidence and certainty about how to handle people's concerns about something that we've never dealt with before. So I think parents need a lot of love. They need a lot of understanding. They're doing a lot at home and in their lives. They're taking care of their kids. They're taking care of their older um, uh, parents themselves in many cases. And I think what the message that I would want to give to them is first to recognize the difficulty that they are having. And I think it works the same way with kids. I think you want to, as a parent, do an empathy check. I think a lot of parents feel like they're stretched to the max. And when they see their kid who just has to do their homework and pay attention to their remote learning situation, not quite functioning the way they want them to, there's impatience and frustration and anger. And I think that comes out of being pushed and stressed. So the first thing is to really try and empathize with these kids and to recognize that this is not normal, what they're going through. This is very, very, very difficult. And to validate that. So if your kid is complaining about doing work remotely, validate that concern. So what does validation look like? It looks like me indicating to you that I hear you, that I see you, that your feelings make sense. Before we go to some solution for our children, figure out how to solve their problem, we need to relieve some of that emotional isolation. Emotional isolation is the foundation of the larger isolation, the sense that nobody sees or understands how I feel. That's, I think, the most important thing for parents to understand about relating to their children right now is to validate the difficulty. I spend a lot of time telling people it's okay to be not okay right now. It's okay to be not okay. It really is. From there, we can cope. We can think about solutions. We can think about other things. But it's got to start there with some process of being seen.
That's a great response about emotional isolation versus physical isolation, Alan. And so thank you. So now I'm posing a question to the entire panel. How do we prevent sheltering in place to become sheltering in isolation? And we can start with, the county executive is on the phone. So if we could hold that thought about sheltering in place, preventing it from becoming sheltering in isolation, we welcome County Executive George Latimer to join us.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I want to apologize. I've been listening to the program since the very beginning. WebEx has made it a little difficult for me, but nonetheless, this is really a terrific effort. I feel like I'm interrupting the logical flow of discussion, so I'll try to be very quick. It is very important that we hear from the community on issues that affect women, and we're in the process of having that discussion. I'm very fortunate to have a number of talented women in my administration and in key positions: Director of Operations, Deputy Director of Operations, Director of Communications, Economic Development, and we have a large number of commissioners. Our Health Commissioner, Charlita Amler, Parks, Senior Services, IT, Finance, Planning, all women who are heading departments of county government. And it's important to really hear what they're saying. So I think tonight's topic, which again, we're underway, staying sane in the pandemic, is very relevant because the pandemic is affecting us in many ways. We talk a lot about the physical health and the economics, but there's an emotional and a mental piece to this as well, which obviously the speakers on the panel are going to pursue tonight. I do want to highlight that our Department of Community Mental Health, run by the very able Michael Orth, has a hotline number, 995-1900, an important number to know if you need that outreach on mental health issues. And the Office for Women, headed by Robbie Schlaff, is 995-5972. Those resources are at fingertips. So apologizing for this sort of intrusion in the middle of the flow of the meeting. We'll resume the conversations, but I'm very happy, and I thank Shannon Powell and the Women's Advisory Board for sponsoring this tonight.
Thank you, County Executive. We appreciate your words of welcome and thank you. Okay. So we will resume the question for everyone on the floor. How do we prevent sheltering in place from becoming sheltering in isolation? Would you like to start, Kelly?
Okay, yes. First, let me thank the committee for inviting me on tonight. This is an honor and a privilege. I'm glad to be here. So first, I guess I would say that isolation for seniors isn't exactly new. You know, seniors in general will isolate for many, many reasons, whether it's lack of transportation, financial issues, body changes, vision issues, hearing issues, mobility issues, incontinence issues. There's so many reasons why they might want to stay at home. They may not even want to go to a senior center just because they don't want to hang around with those old people. You know, so while this isn't, you know, where we've been trying to keep our seniors socially engaged for a very long time. Of course, we're in these challenging times where now they can't even see their families, and they're at home and they can't see their families, and they're not allowed to. Now we've taken away they're not even allowed to come to the senior center. So it's a changed perspective. I'd say if I was to give people tips on trying to not be so isolated, I'd say plan your day. When you wake up, get dressed. Don't turn on the TV until after you've done the things that you want to do in your day. Add activities. There are plenty of activities, whether they be virtual or a conference call, or try to get outside and get some fresh air for a little bit. So many of my seniors stayed in from March until August and just didn't even come outside at all. So just letting people know that they can go outside and take a short walk, that it's safe enough to do something like that is good. Thankfully for us, New York State Office for the Aging implemented a loneliness scale into our assessment early on in COVID so that we can identify when people call here and go through an assessment. There's a 6-point scale that we get to use, talking about social isolation and emotional loneliness. And so this way we get to advise them on which way they should go in terms of what they can do for themselves. I'll pass it to Soledad, I think.
Hi, thank you.
Due to the time constraint.
Yes, so for me, being mindful, connecting with the body and mind, trying to keep the mind present in the here and the now, awareness, not judging yourself, doing things that you love, doing things that are helpful for you, trusting yourself is an important tool for us not to feel isolated, practicing some yoga or anything that you enjoy, sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Soledad. I have one more question surrounding isolation, and hopefully someone on the panel will be able to answer this. So, do you have any tips for teens particularly college students, where they are supposed to be enjoying the best years of their lives, and many cannot live on campus, socialize, eat together in dining halls, which are all part of the bonding experience of college life. Also, high school, they're missing their milestones of the prom, senior activities. Alan, maybe you can answer that since your practice deals with adolescents. Oh, you're muted, Alan. Alan, you're muted.
Yes, here I am. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I do work with adolescents and with college students. So, here's the thing. We can't go back to, we can't have a regular graduation. We can't have a regular year. We have to work on acceptance of what the reality is. And so one of the things that I talk with kids about is the struggle that they have accepting what is actually happening, as opposed to engaging in a mental exercise of fighting and wishing and why can't it and all of this kind of thing. That kind of thinking creates enormous tension and negativity, right? So often we have to first make sure we're dealing with reality and not just fighting reality. So that's one thing. And the other thing, and the research bears this out, that people who do best in a traumatic situation, and I think the pandemic is a traumatic situation. Let's not forget, we've been dealing with it for a long time, but it is traumatic. The people who do best are people who find during this period of time a purpose, who find a meaning in it. And for college age kids and for high school age kids, this is just as true as it would be for an adult. In other words, what did you do during this time that contributed to the lives of other people, the lives of your community? What did you do to make a difference during this historical moment in our lives and in your life? And when you look back on this, what are you going to want to remember about what you did? And I think that the more we can model that for our young people, the more we can encourage them to take agency in that way, the less they will be preoccupied with having a prom like the prom that they wanted to have or they were dreaming of having. It's an important shift. And they are, I also highlight the uniqueness of their generation, their year. This is a utterly unique circumstance that they are graduating in. And again, to try and inspire to take hold of that, right, is, I think, a really important thing.
Thank you, Alan, for that response. So we have a question about the holidays. Everyone knows that the holidays can be emotionally triggering, financially pressured time for many, even though you're supposed to be gathering with your family. Many people struggle during this time. Soledad, do you have any tips on how they can remain centered and be present during the holidays and make it through?
Yes, during the holidays, this is a non-traditional holiday that we're facing. I believe that since we're not able to travel, if we have family far from us, we can connect with neighbors. Keeping distance, having smaller reunions, using Zoom, using postcards, so we can get creative during this time to share, or the holidays are to share with family and to be kind and mindful. And at this point, we have more opportunities to be closer to our community because we are close to each other. Thank you.
That's a nice way to refocus the holidays. So we're moving on to our next topic, depression and anxiety throughout the pandemic. We received a question in the chat, and the question was directed towards Kelly. Kelly, we heard from one Westchester woman who said she is retired, and she retired with the hope and expectation to be able to travel and see the world. Now COVID has hit, and she's even afraid to go to the grocery store, much less Bali or Jamaica. She's had negative experiences on social media because when she speaks with her heart, there are many negative comments on social media. Now she's unsure of herself and what she believes. Are there resources for women in this situation who are retired and isolated?
Well, resources, I'm not so sure about, but I would say to that person, just continue to make your plans. Talk about going to those places. Make your plans on going to those places. This too shall pass. And there are so many, you could start to do your research on where you're going to go. And there are so many virtual tours that are being offered right now. I think the Gaudi's Barcelona is being offered in January, and Amalfi Coast is being offered. There's so many of those virtual tours where you could just start to continue to dream about going there. She's not alone. I know someone very personally that retired in February right before COVID. Same exact situation, fell into the abyss, he says. And I feel for you because you have plans to go and do all of these things, and time is dragging on. Social media is a cause for way too much stress and anxiety for people. Try to minimize your amount of time that you spend on social media. Try to unfollow people that may cause you more stress or your blood pressure to soar, and just stay away from posting anything but positive news so you don't get that negative feedback.
Thank you, Kelly. We have another question about depression. Alan, what are the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety that parents should look for in their children or adolescents? When should a parent seek professional help?
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it's an important question. And just as a little bit of context, the rates of depression, depressive disorders and anxiety disorders in teenagers and young adults are very, very high right now, much higher than they were last year. We're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing an increase in suicidal ideation in that age group. And the stressors in particular on young adults who sort of developmentally would have had every expectation to be beginning their lives, right? Looking for a job, finding a place to live, and so on, are enormously difficult. These people feel really like they've been thrown off their path. There are four things that I usually talk about in terms of, obviously depression and anxiety are different, but to give kind of four pointers for parents to think about how to assess these things. The first would be to notice whether or not the usual coping mechanisms are failing. So your child, you know what it looks like when they're having a hard time. You probably also know what it looks like when they adjust and they kind of show some resilience and right themselves. So one warning sign is that the usual coping mechanisms are not working, right? And so the anxiety and the depression is interfering with making use of those usual coping mechanisms. So that's one thing. That's one reason where you would become concerned. The other is functional impairment. So if I'm so anxious that I'm having trouble going to school, if your child is so anxious or so depressed that they're having difficulty being motivated to do their schoolwork or see their friends, or have relationships with other family members, functional impairment, is a dividing line between sadness and tension of an ordinary kind and sadness and tension of a kind where we would be seriously concerned. The other thing that I ask parents to think about is having that experience where you can't help them anymore, where you're having the same conversation over and over again, where you feel increasingly frustrated and even angry with them. It's a sign that, again, we're dealing with something that goes outside of the ordinary parent-child interaction and the ordinary difficulties that we all have, right? That sense that this is beyond me. And I think parents will have that often when by the time they come to me, they've had that experience for a while. Like, I don't know what to do anymore. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. And then the fourth thing are the identifiable risk factors, the things like, changes in appetite, significant changes in sleep patterns, sudden changes in mood and personality, and any kind of self-harming behavior, right? When we see any of those things, it's time to consult a professional. And last but not least, I want to just really mention that if any kind of suicidal or what might even sound like pseudo-suicidal ideation comes up, even if you don't think it's serious, that's another marker for some kind of professional consultation. It is much better to make a mistake in overreacting to something like that than to ignore a statement like that could have tragic and serious consequences. So those would be the four things that I would focus on.
Okay. Since Alan just mentioned that the usual coping skills, if you notice that the usual coping skills are not working or may not be sufficient at this time, and you notice that someone's resiliency is not as high as it usually is, and as you said, the rates of suicidal ideation are up, now is a perfect time that if you know anyone who is suffering with thoughts of hurting themselves, please call this number and share this number, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which we will put in the chat. And the number is 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-8255. So,
Nicole, can I just add something to that? There's also a text. There's a text line, a crisis text line that is very useful and used by lots of adolescents and young adults. To people of my generation, this seems kind of like an odd, crazy thing to do, but younger people do this. So there's a crisis text line. You text HOME, HOME in caps, to 741-741. And there are people manning this text line 24/7. They are trained, they engage in a text exchange with a young person who might be in a crisis. They can direct them to resources in their area. I found personally with kids, this is a very useful way of helping them connect to services in a way that's very organic and natural for them, right? So I think that's a useful addition there. Yeah. Yep, that's right.
Because your answers are so full and thoughtful, all of you, and we only have a short amount of time, we're going to skip ahead a little bit to another topic, and that'll be for Soledad, will be our next question. A concern that many are having during the pandemic is trouble sleeping. Many are home all day and their days easily blur from morning to night. And by the time they're ready to fall asleep, they're unable to do so because they have not sufficiently exhausted themselves. They have not sufficiently exhausted their energy outside walking, socializing, racing to and from work to be able to fall asleep at night, in addition to the ever-looming thoughts in their head about the pandemic. Soledad, what rituals would you recommend for women who are facing trouble with sleeping?
So one of the things that I recommend is having time to transition to sleeping. So having an hour or 30 minutes to get ready to go to bed. So like, doing things that you enjoy prior to going to bed, turning off the TV 2 hours, turning off your cell phone 2 hours before you get ready to go to bed. Doing some breath work, some pranayama, deep breathing. Deep breathing breath work is the number one stress reduction. It's free. You can do it anywhere, and it is proven through research that it reduces stress tremendously. When we feel stressed, there's only two things. We either feel safe or unsafe. The body feels like it's unsafe, the stress response starts, and our breath changes. So if we breathe, we reduce stress by doing that. Then maybe doing stretches, before going to bed, drinking lots of, water or milk. If it's herbal tea, there's some herbal teas that are out there that says sleep aid or something in Whole Foods. And also listening to your body, monitoring yourself, being aware that sometimes it's going to be more challenging to fall asleep, and you're going to and sometimes that you're going to sleep very well. Just pay attention to what happened when you did sleep very well. And listen to yourself. And these times, be aware that we're always observing externally what's happening outside of us, but we can also observe inside of us, which is our emotions. Connect, realize that sometimes we're going to be irritated or upset. Connect with that. Connect with the mind. Try to keep the mind present. The mind tends to wander. It goes to the past. It goes to the future. Try to keep your mind inside your body. Do things that help you relax. I always think of the 24-hour rule for myself. 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work, and 8 hours of personal time. And that would be it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Alan, I was hoping you could piggyback on that question. I know very quickly, I know there are a lot of underlying emotional issues that would keep someone's mind racing the entire night that they can't fall asleep, especially during the pandemic. But do you have any cognitive behavioral suggestions that you could share with us tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Soledad's advice about the preparation for sleep and not expecting to just go like this, getting ready for sleep, respecting sleep in that way is extremely important. In terms of, what happens when you're already laying there thinking, a couple of thoughts, a couple of things come to mind. One is that research shows that people often negatively evaluate how much sleep they're getting relative to how much sleep they actually get. So most of us are laying there thinking, "Oh, I'm not sleeping. I'm not sleeping. I'm not getting enough sleep. If I fall asleep now, I'll get 5 hours of sleep. They go through this whole process, and it drives you crazy, of course, and it keeps you from sleeping. It's important to actually, and you can do this with some confidence. Tell yourself, make sure you're telling yourself, I'm going to get some sleep tonight. I'm going to get some sleep tonight. Don't get involved in a negative set of predictions about how much trouble you're having sleeping. The other thing that I tell people who are having trouble sleeping is that if you're in bed and you haven't fallen asleep in 10 or 15 minutes, get out of bed. Get out of bed and do something boring. The bed should be the place where you sleep. It should not be the place where you obsess about not sleeping. And if you spend a lot of time in your bed obsessing about how you're not sleeping, every time you lay down, you will be reminded of what a terrible sleeper you are. So one of the mistakes we often make is we lay there and we try to tough it out. And that's a big mistake, especially for people who are chronically having insomnia. Get out of bed if you're not falling asleep right away. You want the bed. Sleep is an intensely habit-driven behavior, and you want that bed to say to you, I'm going to sleep. And then finally, one last thing, and that is a podcast. It has kind of a creepy name, but it's not creepy at all. It's called the Sleep With Me podcast. So this is a podcast of a fellow who has the most boring voice you have ever heard, who talks about the most boring things you've ever heard, and he drones on and on and on. I have to tell you, he's the best sleep aid. He's better than any chemical that you can take, because it just takes your mind into this place where you're not thinking about all of your problems and solving everything that you need to solve during the day. You can just listen to him droning on and on about the forest somewhere and the trees and what kind of bugs there are, and it goes on. So Sleep With Me podcast, there are a lot of great podcasts out there, and I think listening, not watching, but listening to something that's really takes your mind to a much lower level of stimulation is really important. So get out of bed. If that's not working, listen to something boring, do something boring, and try and remind yourself that you can fall asleep. It will help. It will happen.
Okay, thank you both for those thoughtful answers. We have an excellent question now pertaining to women. This question is for each of you. Women often bear the burden of overcommitting. Women often work outside the home, bear the burden of the majority of childcare, housework, caregiving for elders, and now the challenges that are heaped upon them of helping their children with remote and hybrid learning. How can we best negotiate the overcommitment of women's time now that people expect us to always be available remotely? How can women find balance and not burn out within this remote accessibility environment? Kelly.
Well, yeah, I am definitely absolutely one of those overcommitters, if so I can relate. For me, if anything good came out of COVID, it's probably Zoom, because I can take some of these meetings from my desk or from my home when I need to. When you're talking about people that are managing women that are managing their children as well as their job, as well as trying to take care of their mother or grandmother, those are our caregivers. That's that sandwich generation. And really trying to find balance in their day is incredibly important. You try not to get burnt out. If you balance it out, even if you have 5 straight busy days, and you know that on Friday night you're going to be having a social event, any way you can find that balance in your life is key to not getting burnt out. Managing your calendar and setting boundaries for yourself is definitely a thing. Making sure, as someone said it, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours for yourself, 8 hours for work. Making sure that you have a balanced day.
Okay. Soledad?
Yes, I am also a person that can do 30,000 things in one moment. So one of the things is turning off the phone, trying to do one thing at a time. Just focus on one thing. If you're a multitasker, just pay attention to one thing. The other thing is say no. We can say no. We can, it's not, we shouldn't always just say, yes, I'll do this, I'll go over here, I'll go shopping after that. Have the ability to say no. And that helps sometimes create balance. The other thing is that take time for yourself. Wake up a little earlier and drink that tea and take a couple of breaths in between. Transition is difficult when everything is done in one room. So we can do more. So we have to be able to maybe establish a travel time. Get up in the morning, get dressed, and walk for like half a mile or 30 minutes, and that's you're traveling and then come back to the house. So commute by walking and trying to transition from one thing to the next, because then it all feels like it's one thing. So we need to not to feel like we're in cabin fever. We need to feel more that we are transitioning and our day is, going from work, from home, taking care of our kids, not overscheduling, not feeling like our mind is being pulled in so many directions, family expectation, work, children. We calmness and practicing breathing, maybe closing your eyes, doing little things at a time that add up to calm and peacefulness, and a more clear way to think about the things that we are doing during the day. Thank you.
Alan, I was wondering if you could share some tips on that about what can people do to prevent being overstretched? Because I know for myself that I am on, like Kelly and Soledad stated, you want to be there for everybody, and you sign up for about 5 Zooms when you get home at night, and you can't possibly participate in all of them. What do you say to women who need to achieve balance when they're being pulled on it even more right now during the pandemic because the expectations are they're home?
Yeah. I think we do a lot of asking people particularly women, to say no more. And obviously, there's a logic to that, and even a wisdom to that. I would want to put in a plug for finding what you want to say yes to, because the list. What happens when the list of things that you have to do that you haven't said no to gets too long is that the list of things that are unique to you and special to you and which feed you and nourish you kind of disappears. And I'm not talking about getting your nails done, because you get a lot of advice. I hear it all the time. Do some self-care, and self-care means getting your nails done, apparently. Somehow there isn't any other self-care that anyone can imagine that a woman might want to do, right? But it's not about that. I think it's about enlarging yourself, enlarging your sense of self, connecting to the thing that only you in this world can do for someone else or for the world. It's more of that than what you say no to. I think I really do. I think it's that's a source of vitality. And if you can say yes to that, and you need to say no to some other things, if you find that thing, well, that's great. You're on your way to I think a better solution. And I want to put in a plug, because I'm stealing this from someone, for a book called Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. It's a terrific book that sort of takes on this whole question of women's work and the unpaid labor that women are engaged in every day of the week, in addition to their jobs. I'm talking about the unpaid labor. She's brilliant, and she's got some real clever and interesting ways of helping you engage with the people in your life, with your partners, on how to form a more equitable partnership. And I think it's a great, especially right now, when so much is being asked of everyone, and particularly women who are working and taking care of children, et cetera, et cetera. So Eve Rodsky, Fair Play, I think it's worth reading as a way of addressing this and getting some pointers on it.
Okay, thank you for that very empowering comment, Alan, about what do we say yes to as opposed to what we say no to. So moving into the chat, we have Angela Farris, who put a question in the chat. As Executive Director of New Rochelle Municipal Housing Authority, what coping mechanisms can I implement for self-care to our many vulnerable seniors? Kelly, can you please address the question? Coping mechanisms for seniors.
Coping mechanisms. So I would say, there's so many different offerings and programs and virtual events out there. And there's, when you're talking about coping, there's a lot of telehealth services happening, WJCS, Family Services of Westchester. They all offer telephonic counseling services to seniors. But then there's also many, many social and wellness events. There's exercise programs and bingo happening. We do bingo on conference call and Zoom. We don't just do Zoom because that seems to intimidate some people. So, there's a lot of different programs. I would say look for those with your Office of the Aging, with your local library, with your local not-for-profits. Everyone is doing them. And the great thing about virtual programming is, you can call Yonkers Office for the Aging and access our virtual programming. But the coping mechanisms is try to just connect them to the resources in the community. And like I said, Family Services of Westchester is a good one. WJCS is another good one. There are friendly visitor programs. DeRote has a wonderful program called University Without Walls, which is conference call educational program on art and literature and many different topics. There's a lot to be offered out there. You just have to know what the person is in need of and then go search for it.
So we're moving on to the heavy topic of loss of employment. What we see is very real, and every day the long food bank lines on television are troubling to watch. Before the pandemic, reports stated many were only 1 or 2 paychecks away from homelessness. The pandemic has led to widespread unemployment, and many do not have sufficient safety nets to recover. The anxiety of unemployment is real. We have a question in the chat from Jimena Franchella regarding employment. Women are disproportionately affected by COVID. Many business women have closed their businesses due to the challenge of running a business while being home with their children with online learning. What resources are available to support these women in business? Alan, that's a challenging question for you, but might you be able to answer how someone could support their children while at home and they need the income to prevent homelessness and still care for their children?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenging question for me. I mean, I think that's it's a social services kind of problem, right? Are there services in the community that enable a person like that to have childcare while they're looking? I know there are programs like that in Mamaroneck that exist where we have community resource centers that do that. I think that's a really important resource in terms of business owners or small business owners who've lost their livelihoods. I know that some of the local chambers of commerce provide support and a place where similar, people with similar difficulties, small business owners can meet and have access to people with information about what to do. Those would be my thoughts about that. Yeah.
Okay. We will provide a list of resources at the end. But go ahead, Kelly.
I just wanted to add, thank you. We have these cases every single day. It's a case-by-case scenario. Basically, there's so many people that are affected in many different ways from COVID, whether it be loss of income from a job. We have people that had COVID and now have heart issues, breathing issues, amputations due to COVID, and now they can't work anymore, so now they can't afford their rent. We have people that lost income because the person that they lived with, either their spouse or their roommate, even if they didn't have COVID, so many people just aren't going to the doctor and getting medical attention that their situations then become dire and they're going into nursing homes. And then the person left at home then can't afford that rent. We are living in extremely challenging times. I would suggest to that woman that she find a counselor and go through all of the different resources that are available. For us, we look at rental assistance first. We look at foreclosure, eviction foreclosure programs. We look at the small business loans for small businesses that are out there in the community. Then we look at their personal finances and see where we can save money, where the moratorium on evictions is coming close to an end, and where do they stand? Will they be able to go back to work? Like I said, it's case by case, but there's a lot of things happening out there in the community. Rental assistance, foreclosure, and programs, so many programs that can offer at least one-time assistance while you plan to address the rest of what you're going through.
Okay. Soledad, I have a quick question for you surrounding employment.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on how these women can create the reality of hope that they once knew now that their livelihoods are lost or on the line? How can they create hope?
So connect with spirituality, faith, your faith, community, church or temple. That's one way. Again, connect with yourself first. You be aware of how you're feeling every day. Check in with yourself. Check in with your physical being, with your mental state. Take moments if you need to. It's very important to acknowledge your own feelings and to be realistic and true to yourself, to know where you're starting from any day of the, every single day, know where you're starting from, how you're feeling. Checking in is very important. Going back to the employment question, Access VR, ACCESS/-VR is a New York State employment agency that helps people with disabilities, any kind of physical, emotional, mental disability, to find employment. What they do is that they do an IEP, individual employment plan. They do assessments. They get you into trainings if you need to, and then they get you employed for 90 days, and it's free to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Soledad. So we're moving on to our next topic, which is grief and loss. When Corona first started 9 months ago, the images we saw on television were overwhelming. They still are overwhelming. We saw temporary morgues set up outside of hospitals to deal with the surge in deaths. We watch this every day. We are all constantly living with some level of grief and loss each day. Kelly, knowing that the elderly population has been hardest hit by COVID, and knowing that they are being told that they are a target population for COVID, what do you say to our elderly listeners who are glued to the TV often at home in isolation? How do you allay some of their concerns seeing all of the death and dying on television?
You kind of summed it up right there. Seniors are being told as they watch TV that they are, if they go outside, if they're social, that they are going to die from this virus. And so not only are you dealing with some of the loss around them if they've lost someone personally, but also the fear of possibly getting sick themselves. And then family members, again, that can't come see them. Everyone around them is also fearful. That if you're noticing something in a loved one, there's bereavement counseling, there's the bereavement center, DeRoe has support groups, there's the daughterhood circles. There are professional organizations that can assist with bereavement And like I mentioned earlier, some of the one-on-one talk therapy is also very beneficial. If you recognize that someone, that your loved one has lost someone close to them, talking to them about it is, just staying in contact and acknowledging and talking about the person. This is something that happens in the centers very often. When someone in the center passes away, we don't brush it under the rug. We talk about that person, we remember the fun times with them, we acknowledge what's happened. It is part of life. Of course, in these challenging times, it's too much part of life, and it's accompanied by a fear of our own mortality. I hope that answered the question.
I think that the senior centers really are a model for us in this regard because of the regularity with which our older adults deal with loss, and the people who work with them deal with loss. And I think in many ways, I think the rest of the culture and the rest of the country hasn't quite caught up to that, especially during the course of this pandemic, where there's yet to be still, right, any kind of public accounting, public recognition and honoring of how many, many, many people have been lost. And you can be sure that this grief and this sadness is part of the difficulty that people are having coping with on an ongoing basis. You can't just brush all of that aside, all of that loss, all of that sadness and pain, and pretend it's not there. You have to acknowledge it in some way. I think as a culture, we have to acknowledge it in some way. We need help doing that, and we haven't had it. And I think it's vitally important. And I think our elders probably understand that better than our political leaders do. I guess in some cases, our elders and political leaders are the same people. So maybe that will be helpful as we move forward.
Soledad, how can we best process these overwhelming images of death that we are experiencing? How can we process the grief?
So this is a really great book that I've When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chadra, and it talks about griefs. I think everybody feels grief differently. And our beliefs. I actually am a member. I've for the last year and a half, because I've lost people in my life. I've been attending the Death Cafe. This was started in London many, many, many years ago, and it's a group that meets once a month. Now it's online, and we talk about there's no agenda, but basically we talk about everything that has to do with leaving the body and funerals, and at times it's just people that have stage 4 cancer, or who just need to have a space and place to connect with others, because for some people it can be very isolating and lonely to feel all these emotions when we lose somebody that we've shared many, many feelings and experiences and love throughout the years. So this is something that takes time. It's not, grief can take many, many years. The Jewish tradition, for example, they grieve for a year. They have the rituals. And so I don't watch the television. I don't watch the statistics and numbers. I try to keep away from watching that. I try to, this time I've become more spiritual in my practice of yoga and meditation. And I send good wishes. I always say this in the morning to myself: may the whole universe be filled with peace, joy, love, and light. And that helps me through the day, just to keep that in mind, that we all want to be, we all want peace for this world and joy, and we all want to be kind and connected with each other. Thank you.
Can I just say one other thing about
So-
just one other thing quickly is that, you know, I mean, I think all of this is really good advice, and I want to point out, you know, a lot of people will say, well, I don't know anyone who's died from this. I don't, you know, in fact, right? And I think there's truth in that, obviously, but there's another truth, and that is the loss has been of the life that we had. We've all lost the life that we had. And that's an enormous loss. And it's not the same as losing a loved one. However, it is an enormous loss. And there is a sense, I think, of sadness in many, many, many people over losing the ability to see others, the ability to see family, the ability to just travel and get out and walk around, the ability to smile and see other people smile without being masked. These are enormous emotional experiences and losses that we've all endured, and we need to mourn that as well. We need to acknowledge that and say that out loud and talk about our sadness with being faced with what we're being faced with, right? And it's important to process it on that level, as well as the individual tragic losses that are out there.
So before we move on to our last topic, Alan provided a great segue when he said that as a culture, we have to acknowledge the daily trauma and sadness that we're feeling, and we can't stuff them away and pretend like everybody's okay during this pandemic. I was surprised even Michelle Obama said that she's experiencing some mild depression. So that being said, people are really struggling. Can you suggest any support groups or rituals for spirituality as we depart from this town hall webinar that can help the listeners who are on tonight as they move forward through the time that's left for us during the pandemic? Kelly, would you like to start?
Sure, we do have a couple of professional, we have a couple of professional support groups, and then also people that do on Zoom, they do meditation, they do yoga. We have a few professional people that we can refer to in that case. I also personally there's an app called Insight Timer. I start my day every day with a daily meditation of my own. And I have a group of my friends, my close friends, that we all create a gratitude list and send it to each other. And I start my day with that. So sometimes, if you can learn the tool, you can connect your friends and then have your own support group, build your own support group.
Alan, you're muted.
Sorry.
You're muted, Alan. That's okay. One more time.
There we go.
There you go.
Those are great. Those are great. You know, I really I want to mention the organization that I'm the clinical director of, which is which we launched my Mamaroneck Community Counseling Center, and you can find us at communitycounselingcenter.org. It's counseling with one L. There are lots of services that we provide for our local community along these lines that we're talking about. I think our spiritual communities are really important during this period of time, and there's really good work being done in churches and synagogues and mosques in bringing people together via these remote vehicles. And I think that's a source of support that's really important. I want to put in a plug for prayer. And I probably like lost 50 people right there when I said that, but prayer as an expression of our highest ideals and wishes, as a way of expressing those things. You don't need to believe in a particular God to utter a prayer. To utter a prayer for our world, to utter a prayer for a person or a blessing for a person, right? We can just say, my prayer for all of us is that we get through these holidays, right, in a healthier and in a more intact way, and that the next year is kinder to us than this year has been. So there's a prayer, right? You don't need to be a rabbi or a priest. And there's something about it that evokes something very powerful, since most of us have been raised in these traditions where we have access to prayer, whether you're practicing or not. Saying those things, putting those things into words is really important. And I think that that's another important way of coping right now that I want to give a plug for.
So,
Soledad.
same thing as Kelly. I use Insight Timer and Headspace. I also have this agency called Connect in Harlem. And if it's anybody that is dealing with domestic violence, they have men's group, women's group, they have yoga classes, they have free community resources. And since everything is online, you could access that. Then I also, Devi Ma is a place on Mamaroneck Avenue, a yoga studio for women that are pregnant, prenatal and postnatal, and they have doula services. Let's see, I saw the resources, Mental Health of Association, WJCC, staying connected with your community. You have now, we have 78 organs, right? If you include the internet, the cell phone is 79. So make use of your new organ, which is your internet. We have so much that I could take a yoga class in France from here, because we are so connected now through the internet. So make use of the internet, research, teach the elderly how to use the internet so that they stay connected. Walk to your community centers, use your internal and external resources, and be kind. During these times, we need more of kindness. It may be hard to believe, but being kind towards each other improves our mood. And give compliments to other people, love more, and thank you.
Soledad. Before we depart tonight, I'd like to highlight some resource numbers. The Westchester 211 crisis hotline is currently active. Please utilize that number. The 3065 364 3065. You can also call the Westchester Office for Women, headed by Robbie Schlaff, at 914-995-1900, 1914-995-1900. Their website at women.westchester.gov. Thank you all so much to all of our participants for spending your time with us this evening. It has been my absolute pleasure to moderate this town hall for the Westchester County Women's Advisory Board, Staying Sane in Pandemic Times. We hope this text was helpful to our listeners. And before we leave each other tonight, our panelists, Soledad Soriano, Thank you and good night. Soledad, we welcome your meditation.
Thank you. So to begin, sit comfortably with the feet flat on the floor. Check the posture. Lift and lengthen the spine. Let the shoulders relax. Close the eyes or leave them slightly open. Gaze down and on focus. Bring the awareness to the natural flow of the breath. Notice the different sensation of the breath and focus on some aspects, the flow, the movement, the rhythm. Think of a word that is uplifting to you, perhaps a quality that you would like to cultivate. You might say relax on the inhalation and release on the exhalation, or any word or words you choose. Please repeat the words silently with the breath. As you notice the mind wander, gently bring it back to focus and continue. I'm going to be quiet for the next 1 minute and for you to relax and enjoy your meditation. Gently opening the eyes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Shannon?
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole, for doing such a beautiful job moderating. Thank you to all of our panelists for participating in tonight's event. It really has been very informative. I just want to mention to everybody that there will be a link to a recording of this presentation on the WAB site, and that can be found online at women.westchestergov.com, women.westchestergov.com. Again, can't thank everybody enough. This is a truly an important topic, one that we're all struggling with. So thank you for sharing your time and your energy and your resources with us and helping us all stay sane during these pandemic times. I wish everybody well. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
all.
panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.